Something that you observe or notice.
Something you observe or notice, something that you see, right? If I'm making an observation, Nico has a striped scarf on and is out of dress code. I'm making an observation. Actually, the observation was Nico's wearing a striped scarf. The conclusion I drew from that was
what it interprets.
I interpreted that as Nico is out of dress code. Observation, I saw. Conclusion, where you're making an inference, what it means, what it represents, analysis, whatever. That's the, and so this means whatever, right? So if you need to come up here, I know it kind of might be hard to see. If you need to come up and take a closer look, especially some of the writing, you're not going to be able to see it from back there. But I want you to make some observations. What do you see in this cartoon? What do those things represent? Yeah. So if you need to come up and take a closer look at the cartoon, you can do that. I give you 2-ish minutes. But also maybe stand in a way so you're not blocking every single other person in the room. One more minute. That's a big part of the idea. This cartoon would be pretty hard to analyze if you didn't know anything about Andrew Jackson to begin with. Okay, finish up what you're writing. You can get every single thing down. There's quite a bit going on. Okay, just real quick. Overall, not necessarily getting into the specifics, but overall, what is the message of this cartoon? The overall message of this cartoon. What is the artist telling you? Hamburglar?
King Andrew doesn't approve the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, King Andrew doesn't approve of the Constitution of the United States. Who thinks it's a slightly different message? Veronica.
That he's like distributing power not in an equal way. That way he gets like more to himself. Really.
Okay, what's the indication of that to you?
That he's dressed as a king and as a monarch, and monarch has absolute value.
Power.
Yeah.
Absolute power. You got your math.
Just took a math test yesterday.
Yes, so I know you're all in math test mode. I heard it's hard.
Yes.
Who's okay?
What?
The math test.
I swear that
What was the question?
Who took the math test?
that was the day of my funeral.
I take it.
It was the day of my funeral.
Imagine your test in numbers.
Yes.
Hold that thought.
I swear.
Hold that thought. I'm going to bring up the test in a second.
Okay.
Okay, wait. So, absolute power. Monarchs have absolute power in an absolute monarchy. And we know that in the United States, are there monarchs?
No.
Are there dictators?
No.
So by dressing Andrew Jackson up as a king, as an absolute monarch, it's sending a pretty clear message. Okay.
Yes.
Something else to add, Paula?
It seemed like propaganda, like against Andrew Jackson.
Okay, so perhaps this is used as propaganda against Andrew Jackson. Anything else we need to add that has not already been said?
Yes. I think he has like a veto people. Yeah.
He does? Why?
Because he like that was a big power that the president had and he liked to use it a lot.
Okay, he loved him a good veto, right? That kind of goes to that idea of that I'm going to take the power for myself. Last two comments, yeah.
Well, it seems like he's like stepping on the American system, so maybe like it says internal improvements and
Oh,
US
yeah, you're
Bank.
right. Internal improvements, U.S. Bank, right
Yeah,
here.
so maybe that means like just wanted to change everything and do like what we like previous plan.
Okay, anything else? Okay. What you're gonna do right now is the following, if I can turn this on. Alright, I'm gonna break you into 4 groups. I've got 4 posters in the room that are, as of yet, mostly blank. That hit the 4 major topics that you should have looked at when you watched that Andrew Jackson video last night. Okay, so we've got the war in the bank over here, nullification crisis here in the back, that's tariff of abomination, South Carolina, John C. Calhoun, all of those enjoyable things. Indian removal, Trail of Tears, Worcester versus Georgia, everything related to the Indian Removal Act, and then Jacksonian democracy, and I threw a corrupt bargain and spoil system in here because they're most closely related, even though it's not 100% the same thing. And what you're gonna do, I'm gonna give you approximately 3 minutes at each one, and you guys in your groups are just gonna jot down as much as you can get on here about what you learned. You can absolutely use your notes. In fact, that would probably be a very good idea. And then questions that you still have, okay? So here's some important information about Jacksonian democracy, about the spoil system, about the corrupt bargain, but here's some things that maybe I'm still unclear about, or I don't know what the spoil system is. Uh-oh, you have it up here, but I must have missed that in the video, so that's gonna give me an indication of where the areas that maybe we're still missing a little bit, or if you feel good on the topic, but you're curious, like a question to push a little bit further, that's what that question column is. Everybody should have at least an absolute bare minimum of 1 question that they're adding on each poster. Okay, and obviously for this, there should be quite a bit more than 1 thing. I ask 2 things when you're writing on the posters. 1, take a second, read what's already on there, and do not repeat information. It doesn't really help us when we have 6 of the same exact thing. Well, I guess by definition we really only have 4, it's just 4 groups, but it doesn't help us if every group writes the same things. Okay, the idea is that we're adding information, so you guys have this for a reference when we do the second thing that we're gonna do today. The second thing I want you to think about when you're writing on these posters is that there are 15 of you in here. Yeah, we're missing 2 people. There's 15 of you, and there's 4 groups that are gonna come around. So if you write in a font this large, with spaces this big between every line, we're not gonna have room for everybody. Okay, so just keep in mind that other groups are gonna be writing. So you need to write in a way that everybody's gonna be able to write on it. Any questions about what you're gonna do? Okay, let's just do this. When I give you, no, I'll just tell you exactly where to go. And as soon as I tell you, you can go there. Don't worry about Sharpies, whatever, just write on there. I would say ballpoint pen is probably not gonna work out really well for you because you know when you're trying to write upright with a ballpoint pen, you start to lose the ink like a regular pen. So if you got a pencil or some sort of other type of pen or a marker, that's fine. Jacksonian democracy, Indian removal, nullification crisis, war on the bank. Jacksonian democracy, Indian removal, nullification, war on the bank. Jacksonian democracy, Indian removal, nullification, war on the bank. Jacksonian democracy, Indian removal, war on the bank. As soon as you get there, you can get going. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes per station.
I really didn't understand the nullification part. Like, I missed a lot of things, but I did understand the part of like the width, you know, like the political party of the width.
Yeah. So and so then they put out for election list, and so then the Whigs party was in dictatorship, and so they like fired the tax. But in the notification started with that, like what I learned. So like Andrew Jackson notified love to veto and notify that. Yeah, but
The first charter.
Okay.
First charter of the bank.
Okay,
He
so
wasn't the one that would notify you.
because we're like a bullet, so like because of the tariffs imposed on states.
You'll have time to work through it, and if you've got questions, that's what that question column is for.
Oh,
But if you stand here and talk about it, then you're not gonna get anything down. So if you guys have confusions, questions,
Okay.
No fire.
one more minute.
The tariff,
Tariffs that go back.
that's like exceeding the
Yeah,
state's power, that's irrelevant.
But that's not what this is. Right? That would be
Okay,
the thing.
question.
I'm asking you to talk about the corrupt parties, spoil system, and the concept of Jackson.
Wouldn't this be exceeding E-X-C-E-D?
We got about 20 seconds, so you should be wrapping up what you're writing down.
Oh, and another question. Status power.
Okay, finish up what you're writing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Move this way.
Okay.
And start as soon as you get there.
I get this. Or inflation. And we can put that charter, like veto the national bank charter. And veto. The charter. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, they did there.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. I'm saying because I'm right beside you. Shut up. No, the charter rate. What was the charter? Like, no, it's just after. Why the local bank started making more? Charter after second bank.
A minute and a half.
Why was Jackson, Jackson didn't have all the power, but like he exceeded the executive branch's power, Yeah. But he was like, he wanted the local banks that benefited him, that benefited him, So like, what happens with the rest of the party? There was something. Because
If we gave
even though
the executive branch more power,
Yeah, then other local events, so how did the
Okay, guys, I want
rest of the
to
nation
this
react?
topic.
How did other
writing
people
on this, other thing, but not necessarily related to the topic unless you can explain that
El más
a little bit more. Like materials, we can give
The
you
other
right?
maybe that would cause
Is it related to Jefferson democracy, corrupt bargain, or spoils? You can make the argument that it is, and you can keep it, but it's not really related to the topic, they're just random things about Jackson. But they fall into the other categories.
No, you're right. You're right.
30 seconds.
Okay, benefit and benefit tax improvement, you know, and wait, I'm right. One.
That's the lead.
Oh yeah, and another thing like contemplation there's
You guys ready? There's nothing else? That's literally everything you know about this topic.
he you know this thing, right? And then he started like creating these little boards.
Finish the last thing that you're writing and rotate to the next one. I'm only going to give you 2 minutes at this next one. Okay? Move, move, move.
Okay, I got this one. Okay. Also like
So the inflation is more
local
banks
South Carolina was a good
is it like a break? Protect Indians, but also like extract the garden forest.
South Carolina.
Because there were active issues and you allow like the practice were inviting them
1 minute.
and it was winter.
Northern states would benefit by these tariffs since they were more industrial in the south. Would. Because of their industrial.
Higher rent.
Ten seconds.
Not sure what current market is. It's just, I heard, I can so explain. I really
Okay, finish up what you're writing. And when your group is ready to go, make moves to the next spot. Last spot, right? Yes. When your group's ready to go,
Then how do you know? You're just like such an overachiever. Yeah.
Jackson sent one to the local banks and this
Yeah. That's like
Jackson was the first.
the 1800s.
Well, because tariffs on wool and
One more minute.
They started.
I just Marshall keep appearing.
Marshall started.
Yeah, I know. He's like the job. Remember?
Conditions, no.
Yeah. So was did Jackson and Marshall like they didn't have like were Jackson and Marshall like frenemies?
Well, not unfair conditions, but like to play.
Frenemies.
Started
They're like
to-
allies, but they hated each other. Were Jackson
in a way that didn't go with the friends.
Jackson and Marshall.
Like when the second time was
Like no, but
like one has
frenemies.
Like right
R-E.
Like right friend.
started abusing power and they have
Yes.
Well, know how fair it is.
Question mark?
Use.
well like started
Well, no, I don't know what you mean.
I mean that
Why was Jackson like? What benefits did Jackson have from it?
Nobody put that in the
There's a lot more currency in circulation. Yes. But what happens to this?
Yeah. So what?
Okay, go ahead and finish what you're writing.
when was
And head back to your seat. Again, as soon as you're finished what you're writing, if one person in your group is finishing writing, everybody else should be heading back to their seat. Guys. Okay. Okay, let's go over this very quickly. I'm giving myself 10 minutes. Who wants my 10 minutes? Because I did this way too long yesterday and then we ran out of time. Okay, basically I'm just going to read these out. You tell me if you agree or if there's something incorrect or something missing, we'll add it. That way you guys have this as a reference for you. Jackson overused the veto power of the American system.
Yes.
Agreed.
I don't
No.
it's not really the American system that he just overused it.
Okay, so maybe not necessarily the American system, but
Yeah, because he was also against the American system, right? Like he didn't actually personally benefit from it.
what does he in particular, what part of the American system does he really go after?
The national bank.
In particular, the national bank, right? But Andrea makes a valid point. It's not just internal improvements. It's not just the bank. It's not just tariffs. And in fact, you could argue that he, in some ways, is going to support tariffs, right? We should know that. So it's not necessarily the American system, but in general, that overuse of veto power. Okay, lower to middle class men supported him. Agree?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if that says. Spoil systems rewarded political supporters. Agree? Disagree? I don't know what the spoil system is because I didn't take close enough notes on the video.
No.
What's the spoil system?
It's like when he put some of his like friends that could like help him in like higher ranks so that like he would have like a benefit in his elections.
Higher ranks of what?
Of, like jobs like in the like Congress.
In the executive branch now. Because he also.
He can't appoint people to Congress. He cannot. So it's not that he is appointing people to Congress. What's the spoil system? What does he do? It is related to this. This is definitely not an incorrect statement, but we clearly don't have a good grasp on what the spoil system is. And that's one of those big concepts related to his presidency. And it's not a super complicated one, but we definitely need to be all on board with it. Do you want to add?
No, just can you repeat the statement?
It says spoils system rewarded political supporters.
Isn't that like the thing of that more money went to the people politics without really?
More people. What?
I don't know. Like,
You might argue that that's corrupt, and some did. What's the spoils system? Take a look through your notes. You guys should have that. That was one of those. I gave you a handful of key topics. You needed to walk away from that video knowing what they were. The spoils system was one of them. So if you took good notes, you should have it in there.
In his re-election, he told Henry Clay that he had did a corrupt bargain, and like he said that people were cheated on elections.
That was not his re-election. That was the election of 1824 when he lost the election to John Quincy Adams. That's the corrupt bargain. There are some similar to, we talked about the election of 1800s with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who's John Quincy Adams' father, so it's a little ironic that there's some election drama with both of them. But there's some backroom dealing. Remember when we looked at that election, we talked about the 12th Amendment, there was the tie, and finally Alexander Hamilton gets the Federalists to throw their vote towards Thomas Jefferson instead of Aaron Burr. Remember we talked about all of that? Similar kind of backroom dealings, except this time the major player is Henry Clay, which resulted in John Quincy Adams winning the election of 1824. Jackson loses that, and he gets very upset. He ends up winning the next election. But it doesn't, so that's the corrupt bargain. What's the spoils system? And we have a good start here. Spoils system recorded. Spoils system rewarded political supporters. Some argue that it argued, still today, that that was corrupt. But what is it?
Maybe
Yes?
it's giving money from the government to those who, well, like,
There are some things that happen with the National Bank that we could make the argument that fall under this concept of the spoils system. Juhan?
When the National Bank expired, he distributed money to local banks that were in the business.
So we said, I just said there's some things that happen with the war in the bank that you could make the argument fall under the category of the spoils system. I'm going to read what this says again. Who wrote that? Okay, Isa, can you explain to us why you wrote that?
Well, I don't really know what the spoils system is.
But you wrote that, so you obviously have some sense of what it is. Because that's a correct statement.
I thought it had to do with the corrupt bargain.
I think it's like, so if people like vote for him, like in this election,
Okay, I need somebody to grab their textbook and figure out what the spoils system is. We're going to move on and come back to it. Okay, you got that, Veronica? All right, Jackson gave more power to the executive branch than anyone before, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Called the spoils system because Jackson placed his friend in higher ranks to have him benefit in elections. You guys are very close, and you guys have a sense of what this is. Jackson argued presidential elections were corrupt. Which one?
The 1824.
The 1824 election. He didn't have much of an education, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Not in the traditional sense. He definitely does not come from this sort of elite ruling class, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Adams of the world. He's not one of the founding fathers. He's our first president. He was the first president of the United States who's not one of these founding fathers, super elite, sort of the one percenters. He's not one of them, okay? That's gonna draw this, right? You guys said lower to middle class men supported him. What's the relationship if he didn't have much of an education?
Well, that he
That-
was
that
earlier in his life.
he was, that he came from the, he could relate to that.
He could,
That
yeah,
was the key.
right? Yeah, the king of the people. That's a nice way of putting it, right? One of the phrases that gets thrown out when we talk about Jackson is this idea of he's the champion of the common man. So you get King Jackson, which we looked at the beginning, or you hear champion of the common man, the person fighting for the middle class, the lower class, the average person, not the elite. Which again, if he's the first president, we're 7 presidents in, and he's the first one who's not one of these elite of society, you can definitely make the argument that that's going to draw other people towards him. There's a major thing that we're missing. I have to restart my timer. There's a major thing that we're missing when we talk about Jackson. How does Jackson get elected? If he is this average person, how come an average person was never elected before him? What changed? Because this is huge. We can't talk about Jacksonian democracy without talking about this concept. What changes from the first quarter of the 1800s to the election of 1828, where all of a sudden this nobody beats out somebody from one of the elite American families in Adams? What changed? Yeah.
I don't know if maybe the no more.
Okay, but there's something that changes. There's laws that change. You're correct. People were drawn to that. That went to that common man image of his. What changed? Guys, these are all things that you should have in your notes from this video. So if you don't have these in your notes, you did not do a particularly good job of pulling out the critical information that he talked about. This is some of the basic information related to Andrew Jackson, and all of it was in the video. Yeah.
Maybe because his policies defined the new democracy.
What's the difference between 1824 and 1828? Somebody else grab their textbook. Somebody else grab their textbook. We're going to get that question answered, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. Do we know what the spoils system is yet?
Yes. One, Jackson's supporters said to the victors belong the spoils. In other words, because Jackson had won the election, his supporters had the right to the spoils or benefits of victory. This practice of replacing current government employees with the supporters of the winner is called spoils system.
Okay, so what is the spoils system?
That Jackson replaces government officials with supporters of his own party.
Yeah, so you may have been working in and we're not talking about congressmen. We're not talking about people that are elected to office. There are tons of people who work in the government who are not elected officials. Those are the people we're talking about. Okay, so Jackson basically says, you've been here for 30 years, but you don't support me, ciao. You have never worked in a government position, but you've got my back. You now have her job. Congratulations. Does that make sense? It's as simple as that. Okay, reward. I don't know why I can't say rewarding. Rewarding his supporters with jobs. All right. Indian removal made Indians resettle from Georgia to Oklahoma. True or false? True. Trail of Tears was a path where 1/4 of 18,000 approximately, depending on your source, you'll get different numbers, of course, but where that trail out to Oklahoma, about 1/4 of all of those who went, several thousand died. True?
True.
Yeah.
Okay.
Native Americans.
Native Americans sued the government because of their relocation actions.
Was against the
Was-
federal government.
Supreme Court ruled in favor of who?
Of the Native Americans.
Yeah, okay, so Worcester versus Georgia. The Cherokees sued the state of Georgia for their land, that the treaty signed was not valid. The Supreme Court decides in their favor, in support of the Cherokee. And how does Andrew Jackson respond? How does Andrew Jackson respond? How does Andrew Jackson respond when John Marshall says, yep, Cherokee, you are definitely entitled to your land. You do not have to leave. These treaties are not valid. What's his response? It's pretty telling about who he is as a person and what he views his role as.
So,
Yeah.
like, And Judge Marshall had made his decision now, like,
That's
he wanted to see him enforce it, like, if he really dared to make him a new president.
Yeah, dare you defy me, John Marshall? Right? Enforce it. Go ahead. I'll watch. What does John Marshall do? What can he do? Is that an unconstitutional act?
Yeah.
Is it the president's job to enforce the law and to enforce Supreme Court decisions? And yet, Andrew Jackson says, nah, I'm good.
But then, like, Jackson was kind of like rebellious, you know, like he wanted to change the whole like idea that had come through like the system of the federal government system in the United States. But that makes me think like maybe it was that because he was like one of the first presidents that wasn't from the founding fathers, because he saw things as a common person before. So maybe he wanted to change those things with a stronger president, but was it irrelevant?
Do you have a response to that? Dictator? I feel like you really like Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, he just wanted more power, so that he just,
But he doesn't deserve it, you know.
well, a dictator doesn't necessarily deserve power.
But the U.S. was not a dictatorship.
I know, but this guy was trying to shape it so unconstitutional, some unconstitutional acts, so he could have more power.
Yeah, Catalina.
I think that what Veronica said, that is more of his own personal ambition
None of us can talk today, it's fine.
than doing what's good for the nation, because even though he was like he could relate to the people, he still did things that only benefited himself.
Yeah.
So that's one of the, I want you to keep that comment in mind, right? He's the first president who's not sort of from this elite ruling class, and yet he's centralizing his power. And so while he claims to represent everybody, a lot of what he does, maybe you can argue, benefits him more than other people. And so, like some other people that we've talked about, I think there's a lot of comparisons for us to draw between Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. We talked a lot about with Jefferson. He said one thing and sometimes he would do another thing. I think that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're kind of digging into Jackson's presidency. Where are there times when he says one thing and does something else? Just to keep in the back of your mind.
He only goes after like things that don't benefit, like with the banks.
Yeah.
Of course.
Like when he appointed people that were his supporters.
It was like democracy, but
Even though there were people who could do the job better,
was-
and
I
just
think
because
some
they
of them
didn't
are.
support him, he chose to take them out. That shows that he was only caring for himself, not for the good of the people.
Okay, I wanna finish going over this because you
Okay.
guys actually have like some stuff you have to do, and I am so over my time right now. So, my timer's not even on anymore. That's how bad it is. All right, South gains land from the Indians, specifically which state?
What?
Specifically which state? Georgia.
Georgia.
Okay, Indians went to court, we talked about that. Okay, and the tribes removed are the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Seminole, the 5 civilized tribes, and we've talked about that word civilized before. Who do you think gave that nickname to those 5 tribes? What group of people? Who do you think decided, oh, aren't you sweet? You've got a government and an economic system, but you are an Indian. You are so civilized. Who do you think did that? What group of people? In general, like in a very broad sense. Who?
White.
Yeah, white people did that, right? And so we talked about way at the beginning of the year this idea of who defines what's civilized and what makes you civilized, not civilized. And so in some ways I think you can definitely make the argument that this term, the 5 civilized tribes, because these are tribes that adopted a lot of what the whites in this part of the country had established. The Cherokees had even established, they even owned plantations and slaves, right? Constitution very similar to the Constitution of the United States of America. These tribes in many ways mimicked a lot of white society, and for that they earned the term to be civilized. They were deemed to be civilized because they mimicked white society, right? Okay, nullification crisis. Congress passed a tariff that made southern states mad. South Carolina threatened to nullify the tariff. Good?
Yeah.
Force Act, the power to use the military to collect taxes in response to nullification, in response to South Carolina. Northern states benefited because of their industrialization. They benefited from what?
From the tariff.
The tariff. Okay, so the argument that what makes the South mad is that the North benefits from that, but we do not. Not only do we not benefit from it, we lose out a little bit. Jackson's reputation as a tyrant. He gets a reputation as a tyrant among the Whigs. Who are the Whigs? But let's raise our hands because there's a lot of people that seem to know this one, and we want to, you know.
It was a political party that was created well after Jackson's presidency, and they saw Jackson as a tyrant because they were against his democracy. They argued that they wanted like more moral character and the practice or the pursuing of the American system instead of just like his dictatorship.
So it's a party formed essentially against
Jackson,
right? If he stands for this, we stand for this. Okay. We got that. Okay. I like this question. Wouldn't this be exceeding state power? Interesting thought. Okay, last one, more in the bank. Local banks. Local banks were created that were called pet banks. What were they called? Pet banks. We talked about this when we were looking at the spoils system earlier.
Because Jackson distributed pretty much all the power and the money to these banks.
But why pet banks? And what does it have to do with the spoils system?
Because
Pablo?
Like branches of the bank.
The National Bank goes.
Oh, of the second national bank.
The bank goes. This is what it's about. His war on the bank is goodbye Second National Bank.
Well, I think he only he really gave he preferred banks that benefited him personally. So that's those banks.
Yeah, you guys told me that the spoil system at the beginning, you believe that it specifically dealt with the pet banks and the fact that he would sort of direct money towards banks that maybe did things in his favor or were his supporters, right? And so we still see that same concept of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right? You help me out, you do something for me, I'll do something for you. And we see that in appointing people to political positions, and we see it with the pet banks. It causes an economic depression. Agree?
Yeah.
Which is in part caused because of inflation.
yes.
And why does inflation happen?
Currency
Whoop.
circulation.
It's weird because more voices started talking and yet only 2 hands were raised. But there were more than 2 voices. What causes inflation?
There's too much money in circulation.
He knows how everyone else is. Gabrielle?
When there's a lot of money in circulation.
Yeah, when there's too much currency in circulation, it devalues the currency. So it's basic law of supply and demand, right? If there's too much available, if there's too much supply, the price goes down, the value goes down. So when there's too much currency floating around, inflation happens, prices of goods go up because every dollar or whatever the currency is now worth a little bit less than it was before. And as more and more currency floats around in the market, whatever the currency is, continues to devalue, okay? Jackson vetoed the charter of the Second National Bank, which you guys said caused all of this. Agree?
Yes.
Okay. Second Bank of the U.S. expired in 1836, so there was no central institution to control federal money, which is a cause of some of the other things you mentioned. Because states and local banks had power and control over the money, they started to place unfair conditions. I still don't quite understand what you mean by that. Is that the other things that we talked about, or is it something else?
It is sort of related to the spoil system, in which states were starting to put more restrictions on money and give more, I don't know, for example, give more privilege to someone and not to other people. And that wasn't like the
I'm not quite sure that I'm following you. There's fewer restrictions on these banks because they're decentralized. That's why there's so much currency floating around, because you want a loan? Got it. You want a loan? You got it. You want a loan? You got it. You want a loan? You got it, right? Pretty much you wanted a loan, within reason, you got it. And that's why there's so much money floating around. So it's less restricted than it was before, because more people are able to get loans, which is putting more money out into the market, which then is, like I just said, driving inflation up, because there's too much money floating around. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We covered that. One thing you guys don't have in here that's an important point: why is Jackson against the bank in general? What's his deal with it?
that it was the plan was proposed by Henry P.
It has nothing to do with his issues with Henry Clay. Take a second in your table. Again, these are all things you guys should have come in from this video. Take a second in your table, figure out what is Jackson's deal with the bank? Why does he hate it?
And it didn't benefit him personally. So because the local banks that he like the pet banks were the ones that benefited him personally. You know, it wasn't like every local bank. He wanted to get rid of the national bank that so like it was like this huge thing that wasn't really doing anything for him or the middle class. Yes, and the middle class of the nation. So like economy was able to circulate better, but it actually cost it to like
Why does he go after the bank?
in 1837.
That's
This is similar to what
Fewer restrictions that common people have. So maybe like talking about the nationalism and sectionalism, this might have been one of those Jackson points in which he actually wanted nationalism and to help the nation, but failed miserably.
These are kind of like the 08 housing crisis in the United States. Yeah, too much money being lent out, but people can't pay back. I mean, that's definitely hard to depression. But it's not why Jackson's going to bank.
Support our ideas. Do you have any other?
Jackson's law the bank fails in the sense that it causes a major economic depression, which is not, definitely not his intention. So that's not why he's
What do you think? That like he did it because
he ran that risk. Okay, listen. It has to do with this. So let's pause for a second. Who was responsible for telling you what was the other major thing that happened in Jackson's presidency? Why, basically, how does he even manage to get elected? What is Jacksonian democracy? What is that concept? What happens between 1824 and 1828 that he manages to get himself elected?
Well, I found that like he supported more states' rights, so more democracy.
Somebody turn the projector on for me. Okay, actually, we don't even need to, I'm not gonna, because, it takes like 5 minutes for the projector to turn on. Just listen.
President in 18 of the age of Jackson really had very little to do with Andrew Jackson himself, because by the time he became president in 1829, every state except for North Carolina, Virginia, and Rhode Island had already gotten rid of their property requirements. In fact, that's probably why he got elected. Right, so you recall that America
I'll play that one more time for the recording.
quite popular. But this defining characteristic of the age of Jackson really had very little to do with Andrew Jackson himself, because by the time he became president in 1829, every state except for North Carolina, Virginia, and Rhode Island had already gotten rid of their property requirements. In fact, that's probably why he got elected.
They got rid of their what?
Who had the right to vote? For the most part, who was able to vote in 1824?
White men that own land.
White men who own land. Who in most states can vote in 1828?
White man.
White men. huge difference. What does that mean? What does that mean for Andrew Jackson? Why then does Andrew Jackson become the first normal person to get elected? He would not, there's no way he would have gotten elected in 1816. He didn't, he almost got elected in 1824, but he didn't. But he kills it in 1828 and he kills it in 1832. Why?
Because when every white man can vote, like even the common man, then they get benefited from his presidency, so they're gonna vote for him.
If I'm the average person, am I gonna vote for somebody who's like me? Or am I gonna vote for somebody who knows nothing about me, knows nothing about how I live, because they are a 1%er? They can't relate to me. I don't own land, I'm not highly educated, I'm not wealthy. Am I gonna vote for that kind of person? Or am I gonna say, hey, you know what, Andrew Jackson, you little dictator, we have like similar lives. I feel like you get me. Like, we're there. I'm gonna vote for you.
So the middle class voted for him, like the
No,
whole
People who
middle.
had never had been able to vote before now can, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say the only people owning land in this time were who?
White.
The elite, right? Rich people. Now we've expanded who can vote. And so maybe they're going to choose somebody who's a little bit more representative of them as opposed to somebody who's only representative of rich people. Does that make sense? Because that's a huge concept. And so when we talk about Jacksonian democracy, that's a concept, the idea of the common man gets the right to vote. A lot of people associate that with Jackson. Really, it happens in the time between those elections. It's happening over the course of the 1820s. And you can make the argument, and John Green does, and I agree with him, that Jackson doesn't really have all that much to do with the expansion of voting rights, but that he's elected as a result of the expansion of voting rights. Basic cause and effect, right? He probably would not have been elected if only the elite of society had been able to vote, because he did not represent their interests. Yeah.
But then, seeing all the things that happened during his presidency, did the people from the middle class, feel betrayed after they voted for him, or were they actually,
You mean after he leaves the presidency, or while he's in office?
while he's in the presidency,
Think about, let's take the war on the bank. Back to my original question. We're all over the place. So this all ties together. Why is Jackson against the bank? Who does the bank favor? I just heard 6 different answers. So if you think you have the correct answer, let's do this one. Isa, who does the bank favor? Elite. The bank favors the elite, right? The only people getting loans from the bank, the only people that really benefit from it are the people who already have money. This is Jackson's argument. He says the bank favors the wealthy elite. It does nothing for the average American. Nothing for the average American. And so we don't need institutions like that in this country. We're going to have things that benefit as many people as possible, unless you are not a white man, in which case you go. We're going to have things that benefit as many white men as possible. And the bank, as far as Jackson is concerned, is not one of them. It ties to this value, right? And it ties to the spoil system, and it ties to what Catalina said earlier. He seems to do things only when they benefit him. But you can definitely look at it the other way, right? You can definitely interpret everything he does as, no, really it benefits him. You can also interpret it as, no, he genuinely had the best interest of the average American in mind, the average white male American. And this is what drives his actions, right? This is why Andrew Jackson is so controversial. Because what really is driving his action? Is he out for himself? Is he trying to become a dictator? Or does he think that by doing the things he does, he's looking out for the best interest of the people? Okay. Is it a question? Because
yeah, a question.
Yeah.
Afterwards, was there a third national bank, or it just remain local banks.
So there's never a second national bank. I think you could definitely make the argument that the Federal Reserve would sort of be the equivalent of that. They control inflation, they control interest rates, they control the amount of currency that is moving around the country today. So I think, you know, it doesn't have the same name, but it's a very similar institution, yeah. Here's what you're going to do. One, remember I told you to hold on to that, thought about your math test. Next Thursday, you don't have a math test. You have a social studies test, okay? I already put the study guide on Google Classroom and it's on my website, so there's no, and in the interest of helping you to be successful in your primary source document analysis on the test, which you know today, we are going to do a lot of practicing with primary source documents. And we're going to do it tomorrow. And we're going to do it on Tuesday. And on Thursday, you have your test. Okay? I am so excited about it. If you thought that math test was good, if you thought last test was good, this one's going to be better. It's so hot. And it's longer. There's so much stuff on it. You guys, I'm like really excited about this test. You guys are gonna have a fun time. So while we're practicing with primary source documents, up here you've got a couple documents, both brief readings and political cartoons that looks at Jacksonian democracy and the spoils system. The questions are on there. Indian removal. You've got two documents here, front and back. You've got questions here. Please don't write on this sheet. I want you to do all of this just in your notebook, okay? So you have it all in one place. Don't worry about the very first question on here. We've already sort of addressed it, but the rest is a more specific document analysis. Back here, I have John C. Calhoun's argument in defense of nullification and why he thinks it's legitimate and constitutional and valid. And on the back is a political cartoon, so you've got kind of opposing views. This document is a little bit dense. In order to assist you in breaking down its density, you'll notice when you get here that there are parts that are italicized. In the original document that I pulled it from, those sections were in red, but since I can only print things in black and white, so the italicized section, pay particular attention to those because that's really what's going to help you. But taking out the other things, if I just had the italicized sections, all of a sudden it really didn't make much sense. But that's really kind of the heart of it. And then over here, same thing. I've got two brief documents on the war on the bank, and you've got your questions down here. Okay, you're doing it all in your notebooks, and I would say go in your original groups that you were in when you were going around and start where you started. So if you start at Jacksonian democracy, you'll start up here. If you start at Indian removal, you'll go up there. Last thing I want to say before you get going. Is everybody with me? Last thing I want to say before we get going. I think I have 15 copies of each one. So it's not enough for every single person, but also if you're really working through it together and sort of annotating these documents together, I don't know that every single person needs one. Probably one per every 2 to 3 people, so maybe like 2 per group. But I know it makes it so much easier to analyze those documents when you can write on them. So please do that, okay? Please take advantage of the extra copies I made so that you really can dig into the documents and make sure that you know what's going on. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
But then, like in the groups, we can highlight and everything.
So take 2 or 3, or take 1 or 2 per group, depending on how many people are in your group. And it's yours to write on, to annotate, highlight, for you guys to dig into that document and make sure you know what's going on. Everybody clear? Any questions? Everyone knows where they need to go?
Yeah.
Go. Which the rest of them. Okay, but you need to be done with this one before you walk out of here today.
It's not one state that
If you read it, that the rich and powerful lost it, that the access to government is the state of society will always exist under every system. All of the talents, education, or wealth cannot be reduced by keeping the institutions of the state. The full enjoyment of the gifts of heaven and the fruits of economic, every man is equally entitled to protection by law. Avoid laws and regulations and protect natural and just as
that's what I can do, but like whether the
to grant titles, to make the rich richer and the peasants more powerful, the humble members of society, farmers, mechanics, laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing look like favors to themselves, have a right to complain of the injustice of their government. There are no necessary evils in this world. It exists only in the existence. No fighting seems to be.
It's for the entire station.
The rich and the poor, they will be on all parts of us.
the state must track its knowledge.
Okay, so are we working all together or are we working separately? Sitting together
But that's me.
do it as we got before.
Everyone answers.
Because the reality is you guys still struggle for resource analysis, which is why I want you to.
What is the counter argument to the all of us? Get it from the This is mostly fully read and based but the obligation of the state to resist in any country. In a sense that the Congress has acted
So I'm gonna ask you guys the same question that I asked this
that Congress
other than anything else. Are you sitting together in a group and working independently, or are you actually working as a group? Which is why what you did.
They can't actually elect their representatives.
Are you working independently? You just haven't done anything together? You're there, conversations are there.
Who's she?
They're reading to each other, they're talking straight, instead of, I'm reading to myself, not talk to my group members, and now I'm gonna start answering questions. Correct? Happy with everything here? Okay. These documents are not, they're not central. Okay, this is probably the easiest of all the stations. You guys need to be working together, that's the purpose, that's why it's for chambers.
It's like a
And
bank.
so I should be hearing you talk about these.
Counter argument is is the proper
You have to say like South Carolina against New
side
York.
of the constitutionality of the law.
Because the general government, the federal government, created in order to preserve the rights of the economy to the joint protection of which means calculated to avoid under the most perfect security may become not so restrictive the most dangerous enemy to the rights of their citizens, including those reserved under the Navy or the Chicago respectively.
Okay, so anytime there's any question was because he said that, why don't we? You don't need to write the question, answer the question completely.
Isn't that with that which the nations and traffic support the company for thereby rendering it the most sacred order duties to watch over and resist the intrusion of the government, and on the faithful performance of which we solemnly believe the duration of the Constitution and covenants of the country dictate.
You say charge it and deny it, and then you're gonna read it.
So,
Renew it, so they can do
Because states are different, you know. So like some places they still go back to what's best for each state of like the citizens of the state, even though here it says that like yeah, we're not to restrict.
If I'm encroaching on your space,
But the obligation, like, for example, the obligation of the state to resist the encroachments of the government on the majority.
so of the federal government on the states. So if I'm the federal government and you're the states, to resist, so resist my encroachment. You're not resisting my encroachment.
I'm not resisting it now.
But in theory, what would you do? 'Cause I don't know why you won't resist my encroachment. No, you wouldn't.
I mean, I would leave.
You would push back. You push back. No, you can't do this. Get out of my space.
But still, like, going back to your question, like, exceeding state power, like, I get the point, but isn't it unconstitutional?
That's where it's open to interpretation, right? I mean, I think at this point in time, most historians argue that South Carolina is actually definitely unconstitutional. But at the time, we're still, I mean, you've got to remember, like, it seems like we've been going through this for a while. The U.S. is like 40 years old. They're yeah, in the grand scheme of things, this is a baby country, and they're still trying to figure out how all of these things work. And so there's some negotiating of meaning. You know, what can states really do? What can't states really do?
States can do like whatever they want, but if it's like in addition to the federal government, this is how you like if it ties back.
Falls under munitions.
If it falls under like the federal government principles and well, the Constitution.
But I mean, in the same way, when we talk about judicial review, there's nothing in the Constitution that says what happens when a law is made that is unconstitutional. Right? I mean, we have Marbury versus Madison, and now it's sort of universally understood in the United States that when a law is deemed to be unconstitutional, it gets brought to the Supreme Court. But this is, I mean, Marbury versus Madison was 30 years before, which again, in the grand scheme of things, is not a huge amount of time. There had been one attempt to nullify laws before. It kind of became a non-issue because the Alien and Sedition Acts sort of just fizzled out on their own. And here's another attempt, right? It doesn't say that states can't do it, but if you look at other parts of the Constitution, like the Supremacy Clause, you can certainly make the argument that they can't. But if the law is unconstitutional, but then you gotta say, well, was the tariff unconstitutional? A lot of factors to take. I mean, it's definitely open to interpretation. We looked at the questions first.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also, I just wrote in.
Yeah.
Because you can't see it. You guys have about 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Congress
Es siguiente es
Charity.
Well, the state well, for like her, I tried not to destroy, but she was trying for sure.
South Carolina.
Okay, yeah. South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Well, the union, like they don't want to go to configuration.
Okay, finish up what you're writing in the next 30 seconds. Okay, finish down the thought that you're writing and then give me your attention. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, oh my god, group it back, 2, 1. Alright, here's what I need you to do. First, I need all eyes on me. Thank you. Very quickly before you walk out the door, you should all be done. Yes? Okay, there are only like 2 or 3 questions per. The only one that's a little longer is that, but you've got easier documents. On a sticky before you walk out, we're definitely not done with Andrew Jackson. We're going to finish up with these documents tomorrow, and then you'll have a blog post over the weekend. But I just want you to rate kind of where you are so far in terms of issues related to Andrew Jackson. And if you kind of are saying, well, what are the issues, I would refer to those posters. That would be a good indication. So is there something that you're like, yeah, I understand this, but I'm totally lost on this? If you've got questions that really haven't been addressed, especially if you've already been to that station, because you might have questions on stations that you haven't been to yet, but then when you go to those stations, things will be cleared up. But based on what we've gone over so far, where do you feel you are, red, yellow, green, we know what those mean, and why? Or questions, okay? Quickly, and then as soon as you have that done, you can go.